I want to start today with a little history that I think is relevant to today. 1917 was a rough year for Russia. Revolution was raging. The centuries-long monarchy was being replaced by communist revolutionaries calling themselves Bolsheviks. Much of the chaos was in the capital city of Petrograd. During some of the most intense turmoil, the riots, the fires, there happened to be a great meeting of Russian bishops in Petrograd. Now, what were they discussing at that great meeting of clergy? Were they discussing how to make sense theologically of the radical communist revolution happening around them? They were not. Were they perhaps discussing the impact of revolution on the most poor and vulnerable of society and what they could do as the church to help? No. Or maybe they were in deep discussion about whether Jesus would have rather supported a king, a czar, or a communist. They were not discussing that either. Instead, with all the turmoil and revolution and gunfire and smoke ravaging the city around them, the bishops were debating the proper color of clergy vestments, the clothing that priests should wear. Now, our country in the year 2020 faces a crisis moment as well. Specifically, we face an election of enormous magnitude. We must not make the same mistakes as the Russian bishops. We must not turn away from the crisis of our day and pretend like nothing is happening. Now, I admit it is awkward and uncomfortable to talk about politics at church. We are taught from a very young age that the two should not mix, the sacred, secular separation of church and state. Or we are told that talking politics in church is divisive, that it makes people uncomfortable, that they did not come into a sacred moment on Sunday to be talked to about the ills of the world. And I will concede that here, that politics is divisive. Being political alienates people. But good religion has done that and always has done that. The great Unitarian minister Ralph Waldo Emerson was once quipped as saying that only so far as people are unsettled is there any hope for them. The great traditions of religion seem to suggest that religion is political and also that it should be controversial. Jesus challenged the political powers of his day and made so many people mad that the government put him to death. It's hard to get more political than that. Muhammad was persecuted by Mecca's leaders so much that he and his followers had to flee because he challenged them so much. In the Hebrew Bible, the Jewish prophets passionately condemned the leaders of their time, warning them about the sins that they committed. Religion is political, and it always has been. And if we think that religion isn't influencing politics today, then we aren't paying attention. One small example is our national policy with Israel, and why so many evangelical Christians love supporting Israel is because the book of Revelations suggests that Israel must exist before the second coming of Christ. That's religion in politics. It's why some Americans will never support and never vote for a pro-choice candidate. It's because their church has been clear that doing so means being an accessory to murder. That's religion in politics. Religion is political. Politics is religious. We can't be like those Russian bishops. I've also heard a practical concern that because we're a religious nonprofit, being political means that we risk our tax-exempt status. For those of you who aren't versed in 501c3 tax policy, religious institutions are essentially told to stay out of certain forms of activism in order to not be taxed. The tax rule is actually pretty clear and simple. We fear it because to lose our tax-exempt status would be really bad for us. That is true. But it's pretty clear what we need to do. Here's what the rule says. It says, we cannot participate or intervene in any political campaign or candidate for office. That's it. We can't endorse somebody or a campaign or a person running for office. It doesn't say you can't talk about or criticize or praise elected officials who are doing things. It doesn't say you can't engage with the democratic process, something that all Americans should be able to do. It doesn't say you can't champion causes and principles and religious values and how they interact with the public sphere. It just says you can't support or oppose candidates. So let me be clear. Our congregation will never endorse a candidate or a campaign. We will never tell you how to vote. We will never engage with a campaign with the intention of supporting or opposing it. We will respect the tax policy. But we will not be like the Russian bishops. We will not fail our moral duty to talk about what matters. The tax code is not an excuse for moral silence and ethical abdication. Fear of it will not be a bribe for us to stay silent. Because politics is about governance, and governance is about people, and because people are what our religious tradition cares about. And helping people and caring about politics, that is the work of this community. If you say you aren't political, maybe what you are saying, then, is that you don't care about your neighbor's kid getting health care because health care surely is political. If you say you aren't political and that we aren't political, maybe you can sleep soundly at night over the cries of families being torn apart by gun violence because gun control surely is political. If you say you aren't political and that this place shouldn't be political, perhaps what our immigrant siblings hear is that you don't care about their children being stolen from them at the border. If you say you aren't political and that we should not be political, you are pretending that politics is not about people, that politicians do not make laws and policies that either save lives or take them. Politics are about people, and our religion is about people. So we talk about it here on Sundays. I believe that most of us at Fourth Universalist are on the same page about this. And you can tell me if not after the service. But if we believe that politics is inseparable from religion, from human lives, then we are called in this place and this community to get involved in the upcoming election. Not to endorse. You can vote for whoever you want. We don't know, we don't care, we don't find out. The other day, I was asked by a member of our congregation what we were doing about immigration. 2 weeks ago, I preached about being at the southern border, seeing the wall, witnessing dozens of undocumented immigrants, men in shackles as if they were terrorists. I saw that and I felt anger. I saw that I felt frustration. And I felt like many of us do, the need to do something about it. Like the person I talked to here, I myself asked, what are we doing for immigration? And that question in this time can be about really anything. What are we doing here about gun violence? What are we doing about climate change or mass incarceration? These are questions all of us are asking in our anger and our frustration. What can we do? Last year, I was at a meeting with several clergy and immigration lawyers, and we were asking these questions, trying to figure out what we could possibly do. The federal government in that moment had just separated the youngest baby at the border from their family in U.S. history, an infant taken away from their parents' arms. The New York Times did a whole feature on it, of how the baby got lost in the system, shipped off, and how the parents were tricked into getting deported back to their home country while their baby was somewhere else in the States. Fourth Universalist was asked by the lawyers to receive donations for that family struggling to stay afloat and find their baby child. We did our small part in that moment of crisis, but we still felt helpless. I wanted to know from the lawyers in that meeting what they thought the next thing we could do was, not just reacting to crisis, but really make a difference and change the conversation. To not just save the babies as they flowed down the river, but stop the babies from coming down and needing our help in the first place. What else could we do? We asked. We were already a sanctuary congregation. We were helping families when we could, but nothing seemed to make a difference in the large scale. So we asked for help. What could we do? I remember the lawyer's response vividly. She had been in and out of the meeting, taking interviews with CNN and other cable news because, to the great good fortune of the family, that infant had just been found that morning. And that lawyer spoke some truth to us there, those anxious clergy wanting to do good. We clergy needed to hear it. I think we all need to hear it. She said point blank to us that unless something changes at the federal level, nothing about immigration will get better. It all depends on election 2020. Unless our federal government either changes their policies, has a change of heart, a moral awakening, or somehow better reflects the will of the people, the suffering at the southern border and across this country, and all the myriad ways that injustice raises its head, will continue. The lawyer's advice was simple. Keep working for immigration. Keep fighting against climate change and gun violence and mass incarceration. But know that the real battle in this time is the election. The lawyer's words have been echoed by other people since, that nothing will change unless the federal government embraces the values of human dignity, justice, and love. We can march, we can complain, we can help individuals in need, we can drive less, we can compost, we can be a sanctuary congregation. But what really will make the difference is to make sure this election is fair, representative of all Americans. The rest is just more babies down the river. We know how this works and the power of elections because we've seen it right here in this state of New York. When people who cared about human dignity and justice got elected in the state Senate in 2018. We saw what happened after that. Just like that, we had election reform. We had housing reform. We had bail reform. Elections are powerful. Now, activists in marginalized communities, in communities where the people they serve are directly on the lines of these policies, in a way that many of us here at Fourth U are not. They know this to be true. I just returned last week from a national organizing meeting in Las Vegas, led by mostly faith leaders of color, representing those communities directly affected by this administration's policies. What was abundantly clear in those meetings, of the hundreds of people gathered, was that they knew they could spend decades organizing around the causes that they cared about, that with the right elected officials could be solved in weeks. They knew that many of the abusive policies at the southern border could end almost immediately, depending on how the election goes. They know that the work of election organizing is where the work of justice is right now. The work of justice in 2020 is the work of the election. That is where the power is to make meaningful change. There is a lot for us to do. Even for us as a nonpartisan organization that does not endorse anybody for November. The work begins by knowing two simple things. One, our election system is rigged. Two, it is not too rigged yet that we cannot change it, and we can push back. We see voter suppression is rampant. Mostly people in certain zip codes and people of certain colors are being taken off the voter rolls. Laws are being passed to keep those people away. Gerrymandering in the Electoral College and the idea of the Senate allows our country to be governed by those who have received far less than the majority vote. In my home state of Wisconsin, a very purple state, a new requirement was passed earlier this decade to force people to show their ID in order to vote. Well, who was affected by that? Poor people, voters of color, the elderly. It was shown to have prevented more people from voting than made the difference in the 2016 election. The difference between one president who won and the candidate who did not. It threw the election in that state. In many swing states that were surprises in 2016 that flipped from one party to the other, it's not that people suddenly changed their minds or changed their hearts. It's that new laws were passed that kept the people who used to vote from voting. That made the difference. Our country hasn't changed that much. It's that the system has gotten more rigged. Would Wisconsin have gone blue without the ID law? Probably yes. Voter suppression works. So our job, with the power that we have, is to do everything that we can to counterbalance that rigged system until we have amassed enough power to unrig it and fix it once and for all. The point is not just to get your favorite side or your party or your candidate to win this one time. The point is to make sure that our democracy is strong and the system is strong so the babies don't have to keep floating down the river. The point is to make sure that every person in this country has a vote and a voice. We don't have to keep on struggling with basic tenets of what democracy is supposed to be. We Unitarian Universalists at this community and across the world, we are governed by 7 principles. The 5th one is very clear about where we stand around elections. The 5th principle of Unitarian Universalism calls on us to affirm and promote the use of the democratic process in our congregation and at large. Defending democracy is a religious act at Fourth Universalist. Between now and November, this is what we will be doing right here in this community. You have been asking the past months, the past few years, what you can do in this time of despair and crisis. And here it is. Work with us to make sure that this election reflects the voices and values of this faith and this country. Help us unrig the system. Only through fair elections can we fundamentally change our country's course. This work is not rocket science. It doesn't require a brain trust. It is community organizing. It is precision work, intelligent and deliberate and impactful. We've already started. This past Wednesday, 30 people gathered in our basement to send postcards to people in North Carolina. They were people that the NCAACP believed were removed from voter registration rolls by their government who wanted to keep them away. They are mostly people in certain zip codes and of certain colors. And so what we did is we sent them postcards that said, you were probably taken off the rolls and you should register. Make sure that you can vote so you're not surprised. Studies have shown that that works. That when people get sent reminders, the system almost gets overwhelmed by the level of registrations the county clerk has. It's not rocket science. It's simple, smart community organizing. And it's the kind of work that's going to make a difference come November. We will also, in this community, go where the battlegrounds are. The places where people have been oppressed, where their voices have been marginalized. Starting in March, we're going to be sending vans and cars to Philadelphia, notorious Purple State, hopefully once a month. We're partnering with our Unitarian Universalist congregations there to make sure that everyone there gets registered to vote. That's a big commitment, but it's time. It's time. We believe their voices and their votes in Pennsylvania must be heard, because if progressive values win in Pennsylvania, they win across the country. We'll be doing census work to ensure that New York City doesn't lose congressional districts, which we are in danger of losing, because the census has been underfunded deliberately. It's all online, which, guess what, keeps people who are used to filling it out in the form who don't have the internet, keeps people who are poor and marginalized from filling it out, which means that they're not going to get the funding for their communities and their schools and their congressional districts. It's an attempt to rig the system. About a month ago, I had the opportunity to meet with one of our senators, our representatives at the federal level, Chuck Schumer. We were there to urge him to change the immigration policy, to advocate for a fair budget that didn't keep pouring money into the wall and into border security that was designed just to be a hateful symbol of this country's immigration policy. He ended up listening to us, which was actually quite surprising for us because he had not voted in that way any time before. But in our conversation, he suggested something that we took to heart as well. And it wasn't just him that we've heard this from. He said that unless something fundamentally changes in 2020, this might be the last time we have a remotely fair election. He's not the only one who feels that way. There are real reasons to fear that he is right. But it is not too late. We have time now for real, concrete, real, impactful work and action. I want you to embrace the anger and the frustration, the anxiety that you have at how things are. It is okay to feel that way in this moment because the world is a scary place, and it feels sometimes like we are on an edge between chaos and something else. But just don't sit with those feelings. Don't let them consume you. Use them and channel them. Let them grab you and shake you up and push you into some action to show up here or someplace else and use them and do something real. I want you to take a moment to sit with me and reflect on what November 4th might feel like, the day after the November election, the morning after. You wake up. Whether your candidate has won or lost, will you be able to say that you did everything you could? To look in the mirror without shame, knowing that you left it all on the field for our country and our democracy. When you tell your children or your grandchildren about the election, maybe that week on the phone, maybe years from now, when you are telling the story of your time, will you be able to say with confidence that you gave this country and your values everything you could in its moment of crisis? That you showed up and fought for the soul of democracy. This is the time for us to ask who we are and when we will step up for what we believe. What life do you want to lead? What stories do you want to be told by your children and grandchildren about who you were in this moment? If we don't show up now, when do we show up? When could it be more urgent? There are no saviors waiting for us to appear. We have wished for them before. Some magical person to come along and make everything better. There is just you and me and millions of people who show up to do the work. Postcards, phone calls, texting, door knocking, to make sure that these elections are fair. Do not let yourself be like those Russian bishops. Do not let our democracy fall into ruin. Do not allow millions to suffer from unjust policies, nor the rights of millions to be stripped away just because it seems like too much work. Call this activism politics. You can call it religion. Call it defending basic human decency. Just don't sit and do nothing. The stakes, my friends, are way too high. This is our moment, these next few months, before it might be too late. Join us in this work. Pay attention for ways to contribute. Show up when you are asked, and leave it all on the field. We must not let November 4th be a time of regret. What will you do to turn the tide for our country? Let's get to work. May it be so.